Welcome to part 4, in which we're going to mimic traditional film grain. I'm going to take this rather bland, overcast shot with very drab colours, and by converting it to monochrome we get a much moodier looking piece with a contrast that helps bring out the shapes of the castle and the background much more effectively. And we're also going to burn in some detail into these clouds to make them much more moody and dramatic. And you can see, if I zoom in, we've got this really cool film grain effect which mimics traditional organic looking film grain that you get with certain types of old print film. So here's our moody monochrome print, and it's got a nice white border, and I'll show you how to finish off by framing your monochrome masterpiece with a white border courtesy of Photoshop. So to mimic traditional film grain, let's drag part 04 before .cr2 into Photoshop. This is a raw file, so it'll open up in the Camera Raw editor, and of course we'll just click Open Image to open it into the standard Photoshop editor. And then I'm going to click here to get it into a nice grey background. Now the first thing I'm going to do is just check out the colour information, and to do that I'm going to go the quick and simple way of going to Adjust Colour and choosing Remove Colour, because what we're going to do is use levels to create a less drab grayscale version of the shot. To do that, click here and create a levels adjustment layer, and you can see we've got a mixture of shadows, midtones and highlights, and the shadows peter out before the far left of the histogram here, so let's just drag the shadow slider to the left, and you can see that we're darkening the shadows, and that's making the hill and the monument stand out much more dramatically against the grayscale sky and grass. So that's our levels adjustment layer doing its job quite happily. Let me just dock that to the layers palette and move those up so we can see them in the interface. Once you've created your high contrast shot by using the levels adjustment layer, target the background layer, and we'll bring out some more dramatic cloud detail by darkening the midtones of the cloud. To do that, click here, choose Burn Tool, and then set the range to either midtones or possibly even shadows, actually, because we don't want to get the midtones too dark when we've actually got some darker shadows to play with. We want some contrast between the subtle tones in the clouds. Set size to 1000, range to shadows, exposure to 14% or so, and then when you click and spray on the background layer, it darkens the darkest shadows and creates more contrast and more texture in that part of the shot. I can click over here as well, and that creates an even more moody and dramatic monochrome piece. Now here we have a very overexposed area, so what we can do is try and burn in some detail there. Make sure you've got background targeted. Again, use the burn tool, but this time change this range to highlights, set exposure to something like 8%, and then what we can do is just click and spray just to add a little bit of texture, a few grey midtones to this area here, but don't go over the top, and keep some of the brightest highlights visible as well. So there we have our high contrast scene, all ready to have some grain added to it just to add texture and enhance the gloomy atmosphere. So to add our film grain, what we need to do is add a new layer by clicking here, pop that up to the top, and then go to Edit, Fill Layer, and let's choose a nice neutral grey like so. Click OK to apply the change, and there's our grey fill layer. We can now add a noise to that. We're going to Filter, Noise, Add Noise, and if we set this to around about 300%, that'll give us a nice noisy texture. Set the distribution to Gaussian, and of course tick monochromatic. Click OK to apply the change, and if we then go grab the zoom tool by pressing Z, right click and choose actual pixels, you can see the noise there, and it's very digital and computer generated, whereas real film grain will be slightly more clumpy. And to get that clumpy effect, we'll go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and choose a value of around about 1.8 to get a more organic and clumpy looking texture. Click OK to apply the change, and then right click again and choose Fit on Screen to see the entire image. So at the moment the grain is the only thing we can see. We need to blend it with the background, and to do that we need to change the blending mode to something different. So if you click here and use the down arrow keys, you'll see different blending modes and you'll get different effects. Let's just Control plus to zoom in so you get a better idea. And as I move down, some of these are more dramatic than others, some of them are more effective, but I'm after overlay, so if I keep clicking down to overlay, that blends the grain, but it keeps all of the tones and textures that we had in the background image. Now our computer generated grain is doing a good job, but it's a little bit too over the top, so let's make it more subtle by reducing the opacity of that top layer to around about 58%, and that gives us a more delicate looking film grain effect. Let's finish off by right clicking and choosing Fit on Screen, and then Control A to select all. I'm going to create a new layer Pop that at the top, and we're going to add a nice white border to that by going to Edit, Stroke Outline Selection, and let's set the color to a nice white, and that really frames our black and white shot quite effectively. 100 pixels should do the trick. Location inside, click OK, and it will stroke a white border around the edge of the frame. In just a second, it's having a bit of a think. Control D to deselect the marquee around the edge, and I'm going to hit Tab, right click again, and choose Fit on Screen. So there we have our high contrast black and white image with some lovely film grain and a cool looking border. You can add a little bit of texture and detail to the border by going to choose the effects panel, just drag that in for you, and choose bevels here, and we can just drag a bevel like this one here to the border, let go, and that just lifts it out slightly and gives you a little bit of definition and depth to your frame. And if that bevel looks too deep, what we can do is go to the layers palette, double click on the effects icon, and just take that down a little bit for a more delicate and subtle effect. Click OK to apply the change. So there you have it, the film grain effect. And in the next movie, what we're going to do is have a look at mimicking another traditional film effect, and that's going to be infrared.